It was with some trepidation that Krista and I set off on our woofing adventure that summer. WOOF, for those of you who don't know, is the worldwide organization of organic farms. It partners at vendors and volunteers with organic farmers around the world. For your part as a volunteer, you provide hard labor, and your hosts provide room and board in an interesting or exotic locale. In our case, the exotic locale was a tiny village in the southern French Alps, just nestled a little high altitude, not too high up in the mountains, that took a, car, train, plane with a long hangover, mountain range train, 20 minutes up the side of a mountain in a car journey to arrive at our destination in May of 2009. It only took about 15 minutes after our arrival that we realized we may have made a mistake coming there. And I'll begin with actually just the room of that room and board equation that I mentioned. Now, we knew going into this that it would be, shall we say, rustic circumstances. But as campers, canoers, tree planters, it's not like we weren't accustomed to the lack of electricity or running water. What we were unprepared for was the discovery upon arrival that our hosts were recent retirees from a cult. They had spent the previous 10 years following on foot a shaman across most of Central Europe and had only retired to this 18th century compound that they had just stumbled upon, I guess, on their way up the mountain. What this meant for our room situation, though, was that we were directed to sleep in a barn built in 1737. It did, I guess, there was a ceiling, there were 4 walls around it, but really the only thing separating us in our quote-unquote bedroom from the bed of mushrooms that was thriving in the cold and damp and dark next door was the sort of oddly assembled old sheets and blankets and stuff they had tied together. Suffice it to say, sleeping was going to be uncomfortable for our duration of our stay there. The board was probably more problematic. Contrary to our prior arrangements, upon arrival we were pointed in the direction of a cellar, said, "Here are a few grains and some vegetables, fend for yourself." Krista and I were not particularly good cooks, and their insistence that we obey their strict raw vegetarian diet kind of made things, let's say, unappetizing. I should add one more thing we discovered in that first 15, which in hindsight really belongs in that category, which is room and board and washrooms. Again, as campers, it's not like we weren't used to the proverbial shitting in the woods, but their insistence that we use a giant gray plastic garbage can situated just outside our door was a little disturbing. We went to bed that night, and suffice it to say, Krista wanted out, but being the sort of reassuring boyfriend, I said, "Look, let's give it a try. If things turn particularly disastrous, we can always beg out of our obligation early." At this point in the narrative, I'll just fast forward 2 weeks to when things have gotten particularly disastrous. As expected, the room situation is horrific. It's hard to sleep, what with the toadstools, the actual toads, and the wild boars running around outside. The board is, let's say, ravaging our systems. A lot of raw dandelions, raw beets, more raw dandelions. Of course, add that to 8 hours of hard labor in the sun at a high altitude, and the continued and necessitated visits to that giant gray plastic garbage can that I mentioned. And we were on the verge of leaving. At this point, one morning, we were assigned compost duty. So, being the nice guy that I am, I said to Krista, "You can sit this one out and I'll do what is a dirty job." I'm working away, shoveling the compost, working around the garden with the wheelbarrow, when Diego, our host, comes up. Diego occasionally would try to engage us in conversation, and his favorite topic was his self-sustaining farm. We don't need electricity, don't need running water, etc., etc. In this case, we're sort of talking, I'm working in the compost, and something starts rolling in the back of my head. And I'm listening to him, but in the back of my head, there's this sort of mystery forming, and he's queued up something, which is, how were those giant gray garbage cans empty every morning? as he's talking, and as I sort of piece together what's happening, and Krista sort of, with her half understanding of French, is piecing it together as well. I think she did understand the horror in my eyes when I realized that I was in fact standing in about 5 years worth of decomposed human feces. That evening, we asked to leave. Now, Diego was not too happy about the idea of wasting an hour driving back down the mountain, taking us to the tram back to Nice, but he did agree to book a local bus service to come pick us up on the side of the mountain the next morning. And so we went to bed that night, didn't get much sleep, and we were out at about 7 in the morning for a 7:30 bus ride for our 8:31 tram a day, might I add, to Nice. As 7:30 rolls around, there's no bus. 7:45, wow, this bus is really late. But you know, I'm reassuring Krista. I mean, the French, their trains are never on time anyway. And, mon ami français. And 8 o'clock comes, and it's clear that this bus is not coming. At this point, we have a few choices we can make. We could turn back to 1737, although that's kind of not our first choice. We briefly consider trying to walk down the mountain, but the road that takes us down looks a bit like this. So the thought of trying to go down there with cars racing past us is not doable. Our third option, the thumb comes out. Now, I had never hitchhiked before, Krista hadn't either, but I said, you know, we've got to give it a shot. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, we're outside a sparsely populated village, we look and, in my case, literally smell like shit. One of us is a giant, actually, so I don't know why anyone would stop. Sure enough, car goes by, and this is a rate of about 1 every 5 minutes, given the population. It's now 8:15, a few cars have gone by, pretty much we've given up hope when miraculously this little red car pulls over. The driver motions for us to get in, we hop in hurriedly. I explained to her in, at this point, broken French, considering my mental state, what exactly has happened, and she says, sure, I'll take you down the mountain. It turned out she wasn't even going the same direction, but she decided to do us a favor. So as we're going, our good Samaritan speeding at, I don't know, 1.5 times the speed limit down this. I'm largely focused on the hairpin turns and talking to her and trying to be a nice guy when I take a moment just to look back and see how Krista's settling in the back seat. Looking back, I see and then smell something very familiar. It's an addition to the strips of newspaper, the straw, the hay, the dirt in the back seat. There's a distinct odor and visual presence of about 5 years worth of decomposed feces. In this case, it was chicken shit, and it turned out that our driver, the reason why she had no problem picking us up in our condition was that she was some kind of chicken lady who raised chickens in the back seat of her car. I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't tell you why she didn't have the chickens in the car that day, although we're grateful for it. But she did get us there in time. She raced us down the side of the mountain. We managed to catch the tram. She actually refused the few euros that I offered her to sort of thank her for her troubles, and we went along our merry ways. At this point, I could tell you a lot more. I could talk about the amazing chicken we ate that night for dinner, the hotel bedroom, the shower, but I just want to leave on this note, and I think in keeping with tonight's theme. Chris and I have since parted ways, but I think she'd appreciate it when I say, "À vous, la dame des poules," to you, the chicken lady. From the bottom of my heart, et de la part de Krista aussi, merci à vous, thank you very much, and